My water broke on the welcome mat, but instead of the door opening, the smart lock clicked shut. A red light flashed. My mother-in-law's voice crackled through the speaker, telling me to be quiet. Through the garage window, I saw my husband sitting in the driver's seat. He was not coming to help me. He was texting his lawyer. I realized too late that they had not just locked the house, but they had frozen my entire existence. My name is Brooke Halstead. I deal in paper trails. As an internal compliance investigator for Northbridge Integrity Systems, I spend my days hunting for the quiet discrepancies in corporate ledgers. I look for the 1.5% variance that signals embezzlement or the timestamp that does not match the security log. I am 33 years old, and I have trained myself to trust nothing that cannot be verified by a digital footprint. Yet, standing in my kitchen in Harbor Glen, New Jersey, I had let the soft fog of pregnancy dull my instincts. This colonial revival house was supposed to be our sanctuary. On paper, it belonged to Graham and me equally. In reality, the $140,000 used for the down payment had come from my savings, liquidated from a portfolio I built before I ever met a Caldwell. I still had the wire transfer receipts saved on 3 different hard drives. Graham Caldwell, my husband, did not like to talk about money. He worked at Hawthorne and Vance Capital, a place where image was the only currency that mattered. He hated what he called unnecessary friction. Friction was anything that required him to feel an uncomfortable emotion. His mother, Vivian Caldwell, was the architect of that fragility. She was a woman who wrapped insults in cashmere and spoke in a voice as soft as velvet but as suffocating as a pillow over the face. To her, I was not a daughter-in-law. I was a structural accessory, useful for dual income and breeding, but easily discarded if I clashed with the aesthetic. I was 39 weeks pregnant. My ankles were swollen and my patience was thin. I should have seen the pattern emerging over the last month. First, Graham changed the password to the electric and water utility accounts. He claimed he was consolidating security. Then came the doorbell camera maintenance. He spent 2 hours on a ladder 3 days ago, fiddling with the lens. Finally, the constant warnings. "Brooke, please do not post anything about the baby coming soon," he had said. "We want privacy." The cracks became visible last night at the charity gala Vivian had organized. I arrived in a dress that fit my 3rd trimester frame, expecting to sit next to my husband. Instead, the seating chart placed me at an overflow table near the kitchen. A donor actually handed me her empty wine glass, mistaking me for the event coordinator. I saw Graham at the head table, laughing at something a partner said, not once looking in my direction. I did not make a scene. I just memorized every face at that table. Later that night, my phone buzzed with an alert from our joint bank account. It read that the recovery email had been updated. I was exhausted, my back aching with the early tremors of labor, so I swiped it away. I told myself it was a system glitch. That was my fatal error. I assumed incompetence when I should have suspected malice. The pain started in earnest at 7 in the morning. It was a low, grinding ache in my lower back that wrapped around to my stomach. I waddled into the living room, gripping the door frame. Graham was fully dressed, sitting on the sofa, scrolling through his phone. "Graham, it is time," I said, grasping the back of the armchair. "We need to go." He did not jump up. He did not panic. He looked at me with a terrifying calmness. "Wait for my mother," he said. "She is coming to drive you." "Drive me, Graham. The hospital bag is in your car. Just let us go." "Mom wants to help," he insisted, his eyes not leaving his screen. "Go check the bag in the car. Make sure you have the insurance card. I think you left it in the side pocket." It made no sense. The insurance card was in my wallet. But the contraction seized me, and I just wanted to move. I needed air. I dragged my suitcase out the front door and down to the first concrete step of the porch just as the contraction peaked. It felt like a serrated knife twisting in my lower back. The morning air was cold. Suddenly, I realized I had left my phone on the entryway table inside. I gasped, dropping the handle, and spun around to grab it. That was when I heard it. The distinct mechanical whir of the deadbolt sliding into place. The electronic lock panel, which I had installed myself 2 years ago, flashed. The small LED ring turned a solid, unforgiving red. I punched in our code, 4821. The keypad beeped 3 times in rapid succession. The red light did not blink. It just stared back at me. Access denied. I looked through the glass, my heart hammering against my ribs, and realized the nightmare had begun. Then, the ring light around the doorbell camera pulsed blue. My mother-in-law's voice floated through the high-fidelity speaker, crisp and horribly calm. "Con." "You need to go," Vivian said. Her voice had that sickeningly sweet tone she used when correcting a servant. "Find a way to the hospital by yourself. Do not make a scene." I slammed my palm against the wood. "Graham!" I screamed. I leaned over the railing to look through the frosted glass panel that ran alongside the door frame. I could see straight through the hallway into the attached garage. The interior light was on. Graham was sitting in the driver's seat of his SUV. He was not looking for his keys. He was not panicking. He was looking at his phone, his face illuminated by the pale blue glow of the screen. He looked up, met my eyes through the layers of glass, and then looked back down at his device. My phone buzzed in my hand. I looked down through blurred vision. A text from Graham. "You are hysterical. I am calling a car service. Do not break the door. It will make the family look bad." I stared at the screen, my fingers trembling. He was worried about the door. He was worried about the neighbors seeing a dent in the mahogany. I tried to type a reply, but my fingers were too slippery with sweat. I needed to get out of here. I needed a ride. I switched apps, opening my banking application to check my balance before calling a ride share. The screen loaded for a second, then went blank. A dialog box popped up, "Access denied." I tapped "Forgot password." The system immediately displayed a confirmation message. "A recovery code has been sent to v.caldwell.legal@gmail.com. My breath hitched in my throat. That was not my email. That was a firm address. They had not just locked the door, they had cut the financial cord. The doorbell speaker crackled again. Vivian was still watching me from wherever she was hiding. "Brooke, listen to me," she said, the sweetness dropping just a fraction. "After you sign. Well, once the papers are signed, you can come back inside. It is simple." I froze. The pain in my stomach was nothing compared to the ice that flooded my veins. This was not a domestic dispute. This was a hostage negotiation, and my unborn child was the leverage. They were banking on my desperation. They knew I would sign anything to get to a doctor. "Honey, are you okay?" I jumped. Marla Quinn, my neighbor from 2 houses down, was standing at the edge of the driveway. She was a retired ER nurse, wearing a gardening hat and holding a trowel. She must have heard me screaming. I stumbled toward her, gripping the porch railing. I could not explain. I could not waste breath on the backstory. "Call 911. I gasped, clutching my stomach. And... "Marla, record everything." Marla did not ask questions. She saw the water on the pavement and the terror in my eyes. She pulled out her phone immediately. 10 minutes later, the ambulance arrived. The paramedics loaded me onto the gurney. As they lifted me, I had a clear view of the garage. The door was rolled up about 2 feet. Graham was standing there in his loafers and pressed slacks. He watched the paramedics strap me in. He did not step forward. He reached out and pressed the button on the wall. The garage door began to grind downward, closing like a heavy curtain on a stage play. I grabbed my phone one last time before the EMT took my vitals. I opened the smart home app. I still had a cached session active. The camera feed from the doorbell showed the empty porch. I took a screenshot. Then, A small gray banner appeared at the top of the screen. Admin privileges transferred to user D. Cross. I stared at the name. It was not Graham. It was not Vivian. Someone else now owned the eyes of my house. I let the phone drop to my chest as the ambulance doors slammed shut. The fluorescent lights of the labor and delivery triage room hummed with a frequency that usually gave me a migraine. Today, I welcomed the distraction. It was a constant variable in a chaotic equation. A nurse was strapping a fetal monitor to my stomach, asking standard questions about my pain levels. I ignored the contraction seizing my uterus and focused on the paperwork. "I need a physical copy of the intake report," I said, my voice tight but steady. "Right now." The nurse blinked, pausing with the gel bottle in her hand. "Honey, let us get you settled first. Your husband is, I am unaccompanied." I cut in. "I need the report to state clearly that I arrived via ambulance, alone, at 8:45 in the morning, condition distressed, companion none. Print it." I was establishing a timeline. In my line of work, a gap in the log is where the guilt hides. Once she left to print the page, I pulled my phone out. My hands were shaking, not from fear anymore, but from a cold, calculating rage. I texted Marla Quinn. "Do not text me the video file. Upload the doorbell footage and the audio recording to your personal cloud drive. Send me a read-only link. They have compromised my accounts." I watched the 3 dots of her typing bubble appear and disappear. Then, a link arrived. Good. If Graham or whoever was running his tech scrubbed the cloud, Marla's copy would survive. That was Exhibit A. I reached into my bag and pulled out my backup laptop. It was an old model I used for field work, disconnected from our home network. I tethered it to the hospital Wi-Fi and logged into the family calendar using a backdoor viewer I had set up months ago to sync with my work Outlook. It was a read-only view, but that was all I needed. There it was. A blocked-out event for 10 o'clock in the morning today. The title was innocuous, Asset Reclassification. The attendees listed were Graham, Vivian, and their family estate attorney, Marcus Thorne. I clicked on the notes section. My blood ran cold. Delivery window/leverage window. I stared at the screen. They had not just reacted to my labor, they had scheduled around it. They called the birth of my daughter a leverage window. They knew I would be incapacitated, doped up on epidurals or screaming in pain. And that would be the moment they struck. I dialed Miles Kerner. He was a former colleague from the fraud division, a man who lived in server rooms and trusted code more than people. He answered on the second ring. "Brooke, you are supposed to be having a kid." "Miles." "Listen to me carefully," I said, pressing the phone to my ear as another contraction rolled over me like a tidal wave. "I need you to initiate a chain of custody protocol. I am being locked out of my digital life. They changed the recovery emails. Who is they, Graham? Vivian? I need you to create an immutable backup of everything you can reach before they purge it. And Miles, tell me how to kill a login session remotely without the admin password. I can run a script to force a token refresh on the bank side if you give me your verbal authorization," Miles said, his voice dropping to his professional register. "But Brooke, this sounds like a felony in progress." "It is," I whispered. "Just get the logs." While Miles typed in the background, I opened the banking app on the laptop. It was still caching data from yesterday. I refreshed the feed. It loaded slowly. There were 5 transactions since 4 o'clock this morning. They were small transfers, $4,000, $3,500 moving from our joint savings into an external account labeled H&V Consulting. They were draining the liquidity in small sips to avoid triggering the federal $10,000 reporting alert. My mind flashed back to 2 weeks ago. Graham had come into the home office while I was drowsy on the couch. He had asked to borrow my digital signature pad to sign some updated family insurance riders. I had given it to him. I was tired. I trusted him. I realized now that I had likely pre-signed my own financial death warrant. My phone pinged. A text from Vivian. It was an image file, a photo of a document resting on a mahogany desk. The text was blurry, but the header on the last page was crystal clear. Post-nuptial agreement amendment. Below the image, a single message sign before you get busy. It is for her protection. I looked at the nurse walking back in with my printout. The pain was blinding now, a physical force trying to tear me apart from the inside. But my mind was crystalline. I would push this baby out. I would make sure she was safe. And the second my head cleared, I was not just going to divorce them. I was going to audit them into the ground. I am ready, I told the nurse, grabbing the intake form and shoving it under my pillow. Let us get this over with. My daughter arrived at 12:42 in the afternoon. She was 6 pounds and 8 ounces of quiet determination. I did not weep when they placed her on my chest. I felt a clarifying heat burn through the fog of exhaustion. I looked at her sleeping face, her skin still flushed and new, and I made a silent promise. I would not let her be a bargaining chip. I would not let her be leverage. You will not be collateral damage. You will be the reason they lose. 10 minutes after the nurses cleared the room, I was not sleeping. I was on the hospital landline, holding the receiver with a bruised hand. I dialed Rhea Sutherland. Rhea was a shark who viewed marriage as a corporate merger that usually ended in a hostile takeover. She did not ask how I felt. She asked for the data. She is here. Healthy, I said, my voice steady. Now, let us talk about the house. I am filing for an ex parte emergency order regarding the assets, Rhea said, her tone sounding like the click of a loaded gun. We are requesting a freeze on liquid assets and a mandatory preservation of data. I need you to authorize a formal preservation letter. Miles Kerner was working the digital angle on my laptop. He had arranged a video verification with a branch manager he knew personally, bypassing the compromised phone security protocols. The manager's face appeared on my screen, looking concerned. Mrs. Caldwell. We show a verbal authorization for the email change at 7:30 this morning, the manager said, reading from a log. The caller verified your social and mother's maiden name. That was not me, I said, staring into the camera lens. I was in labor in my driveway. Check the source number of the incoming call. There was a pause as the manager typed. It originated from a PBX switchboard, registered to Thorne and Associates. My blood ran cold. Marcus Thorne, the family lawyer. They had someone at the law firm impersonate me to hijack my bank account. That was not just a dirty divorce tactic. That was federal wire fraud. Flag it as fraud, I commanded. And Miles, send the legal hold notice to the general counsel at Hawthorne and Vance Capital immediately. Subject line preservation of evidence regarding B. Halstead versus G. Caldwell. I dictated the keywords for the search warrant that would follow lockout. Postnup, leverage, delivery window. That will trigger their internal compliance software, Miles said, typing furiously. Graham cannot delete anything on his work server now without flagging IT. If he tries to scrub his emails about the leverage window, he will be fired for destroying company data. I opened my digital vault on the laptop. I pulled up the deed and the closing disclosure from 3 years ago. I needed to know exactly how much ground I stood on. Rhea, I have the wire trace. I said, $140,000 for the down payment. It came from my premarital investment account. They can lock the door, but they are standing on my equity. The house is 60% mine by contribution logic. Brooke, listen to me, Rhea warned, her voice dropping an octave. They know you are tracking the money. Their next move will be character assassination. They are going to file for emergency guardianship. They will claim you are unstable, that the hormones have made you paranoid. They will say the lockout was for your own safety because you were acting out. Let them try, I said. I looked at the transaction log one last time. Graham had a supplementary credit card attached to my primary credit line and Amex he used for his client dinners that were actually just drinks with his college friends. I tapped the report problem button next to his card number. I am flagging all activity on the supplementary card as unauthorized. I told the bank manager. The cardholder is spending assets that are currently under dispute in a domestic litigation. Freeze it. Frozen. The manager confirmed. Graham was likely buying a celebratory round of drinks right now, or perhaps paying the locksmith to change the tumblers on my front door. When he tried to swipe that card, it would decline. It was a small, petty victory, but it sent a clear message. I was not just a mother holding a baby. I was the chief financial officer of this family, and I had just cut off the funding. My phone vibrated against the plastic bedside table at 2:17 in the morning. The hospital room was dark, save for the rhythmic green flash of the heart rate monitor. I was not sleeping. I was waiting. The notification was an email from a sender I did not recognize, sparrowline@protonmail.com. The subject line was blank. Attached was a single PDF file titled Contingency Timeline, Family Optics. I sat up, ignoring the protest of my bruised muscles. The file name sent a shiver down my spine. It was the exact phrase I had seen in Graham's calendar earlier leverage window. I opened the email body first. There was no greeting, just two sentences that made the air in the room feel suddenly thin. They did not lock you out just because of you. They locked you out to lock your mouth. I opened the PDF. It was a strategic document, the kind used for crisis management. It listed dates, planned social media posts, and press releases drafted in advance. One entry caught my eye. Post-birth announcement shift narrative to mother's recovery needs. Isolate from financial duties. My mind raced back to the gala the night before. I thought of the woman who had taken my seat at the head table, Delaney Cross. She was a partner at Graham's firm, a woman with sharp features and ambition that radiated off her like heat. She had smiled at me when I was ushered to the overflow table. It was not a polite smile. It was a winner's smile. I texted Miles. Pull up the PR photos from the gala. Look for Delaney Cross and Vivian. Miles responded within 30 seconds. Looking now. Sending you a zoomed crop. The image loaded. It showed Vivian and Delaney standing together near the podium. Vivian's hand was resting firmly on the small of Delaney's back. In the language of body politics, it was not just a touch. It was an endorsement. It was a transfer of power. Miles, I whispered into the phone. Check the board members of Vivian's charity, the Heritage Fund. I am already there, Miles said, his voice sounding tinny through the speaker. Brooke, you are listed on the annual report. What you are listed as the financial oversight volunteer, he read, since 2 years ago. I never volunteered for that, I said, my grip tightening on the phone. I have never attended a single meeting. Vivian told me I was too, corporate for their mission. Well, according to the public tax filings, you signed off on the internal audit, Miles said. Brooke, looking at these expenses, they are ugly. There is a line item for consulting services totaling $250,000 paid to a shell company in Delaware, and external relations is bloated by 300%. Who authorized the payments? Graham Caldwell. Miles replied, but the oversight line. The compliance check. That lists you. My inbox pinged again. Another email from Sparrowline. This time, it was a screenshot of an internal Excel spreadsheet. The columns were dense with numbers, but the sender had highlighted column F in yellow. The header read, Compliance Approval. Every single row, dozens of fraudulent payments, kickbacks disguised as consulting fees. Personal expenses written off as charity work had a signature in the cell next to it. Approved by B. Halstead. I zoomed in. It was my digital signature. The exact pixelated curve of the B and the sharp cross of the H. It was the signature Graham had asked to borrow 2 weeks ago for the insurance papers. He had not just borrowed it, he had cloned it. The realization hit me harder than the labor pains. This was not about a mistress. This was not even about the house. They are using me as a shield, I said, my voice trembling with a cold, terrifying clarity. Miles, if this fund gets audited, Graham claims he just signed the checks based on my expert approval. I am the compliance officer. I am the professional. If there is fraud, I am the one who goes to prison. And the lockout. Miles trailed off. The lockout. I finished for him. The post-nup amendment. It was not just about assets. They needed me to sign a document that ratified all prior financial decisions made during the marriage. They were trying to get me to legally retroactive approve the theft while I was screaming in pain. I looked at my sleeping daughter. They had turned her birth into a deadline for a cover-up. Vivian and Graham were not just cruel, they were constructing a cage where I would take the fall for a $500,000 embezzlement scheme. Forget the divorce. Miles, I said, closing the laptop with a snap. This is no longer a domestic dispute. I need to clear my name before the FBI knocks on my door. I am not going to let them bury me under their crimes. I was done playing defense. It was time to show them what a real investigator looked like when she was the one being hunted. The attack on my career arrived before the discharge papers were even signed. My work phone buzzed with an incoming email notification from the Northbridge Integrity Systems Human Resources Director. The subject line was chillingly formal: Notice of Internal Investigation and Immediate Suspension of Privileges. I opened the attachment. An anonymous whistleblower had filed a formal complaint alleging that I, Brooke Halstead, had utilized proprietary company forensic tools to illegally surveil a private citizen specifically. My husband, Graham Caldwell. They were accusing me of a serious ethics violation. If proven true, I would not just be fired, I would be blacklisted from the compliance industry forever. I did not cry. I did not panic. I recognized the strategy immediately. They knew I would be postpartum, tired and emotional. They expected me to call my boss screaming about injustice, which would only prove their narrative that I was unstable. Instead, I forwarded the email to my personal secure server and dialed the number Rhea gave me. Tessa Lang speaking. The voice on the other end answered. She sounded sharp, like the tear of a perforated page. This is Brooke Halstead, I said, sitting on the edge of the hospital bed while nursing my daughter. My employer just received a fabrication intended to terminate my employment. I need you to draft a preservation letter to Northbridge. Tell them I categorically deny the allegations and that I demand all communication be in writing. No phone calls. I want a paper trail for every breath they take. Smart, Tessa replied. We will frame this as retaliation against a whistleblower. You are not the perpetrator. You are the target. While Tessa handled Northbridge, I opened the raw header data of the anonymous complaint email, which my boss had foolishly attached to the notice. I ran a simple traceroute on the originating IP address. It was not a VPN. It was not a burner phone. Unbelievable, I muttered. The IP address belonged to the guest Wi-Fi network at the headquarters of Hawthorne and Vance Capital. They were so arrogant, so assured of my destruction, that they had sent the death threat to my career from the lobby of Graham's office building. Northbridge responded an hour later. They were placing me on paid administrative leave pending an investigation. It was a protective measure, but it came with a cost. My access to the company servers was revoked. I was safe, but I was blind. Then came the public humiliation. My phone lit up with a Google alert for my own name. The local Harbor Glen Gazette had published a puff piece in the society section. Caldwell family requests privacy. The article quoted Vivian directly. We are overjoyed by the arrival of our granddaughter. We ask for the community's prayers for Brooke as she navigates a difficult and sensitive recovery period. We are doing everything to support her mental health during this transition. She was painting me as a woman on the verge of a breakdown. She was laying the groundwork for a competency hearing. My phone chimed with a text from Graham. I just want our daughter to be safe. You are not thinking clearly. Sign the amendment, and all of this noise goes away. Just come home. I took a screenshot. That was coercion. He was offering to stop the professional and social assault in exchange for a signature. Miles, I said, calling him on the burner line. I need to know the status of the house. Do not go there. Brooke, Miles said, his voice urgent. I checked the smart home logs again. The admin privileges were not just transferred, they were hard-coded to a new primary user. It is Delaney Cross. She has control of the locks, the cameras, even the thermostat. A third party. Graham's business partner. The woman who forged the scheme now held the keys to the house where my child was supposed to sleep. I am not going back, I said. If I walk through that door, I am walking into a prison. I had Rhea book a short-term corporate apartment 3 towns over, paid for by her firm to keep the transaction off my credit cards. I would not give them a utility bill to track. As I packed the hospital bag, I opened my laptop one last time. I was done playing defense. I drafted a formal letter to the board of directors of the Heritage Fund. I did not use emotional language. I did not mention my marriage. I wrote as a compliance officer. To the board of directors, I am writing to formally report a systemic breach of financial controls. A review of internal documents reveals that my digital signature has been utilized to authorize payments to unverified vendors without my consent or knowledge. I am requesting an immediate forensic audit of all disbursements made to H&V Consulting over the last 24 months. I attached the metadata analysis of the forged signatures. I hit send. I was not asking for a divorce settlement anymore. I was lighting a match in a room full of gasoline, and I was the only one holding a fire extinguisher. The email from Graham arrived with a subject line that was almost laughable in its hypocrisy, family reconciliation, and path forward. The body of the message proposed a meeting at the offices of Thorne and Associates to de-escalate the situation and discuss a comprehensive settlement. Vivian followed up with a text message 5 minutes later. Bring the baby. We just need one final signature to unlock everything. Then we can be a family again. I forwarded both messages to Tessa Lang. Do not bring the child, Tessa advised immediately, her voice sharp on the line, and do not agree to an informal chat. If they want a meeting, we treat it like a deposition. We demand a certified court reporter present to produce a verbatim transcript. I agree, I said, pacing the small living room of the corporate apartment. But I have one condition for them. I want a written agenda item titled Explanation of Lockout During Active Labor. I want them to have to speak to it on the record. 2 days later, I walked into the conference room at Thorne and Associates. I was wearing my sharpest navy blazer, the one I usually saved for audit defense meetings. Graham sat on one side of the long mahogany table, looking tired but smug. Vivian sat next to him, her posture rigid. Then, the door opened and Delaney Cross walked in. I felt a spike of adrenaline. She was not family. She was not their legal counsel. She placed a leather notebook on the table and sat next to Graham, smoothing her skirt. Ms. Cross is here as my strategic advisor, Graham said, avoiding my eyes. It was a power move. They were trying to rattle me, to remind me that I had been replaced in every capacity that mattered. I sat down next to Tessa and the court reporter. I did not greet them. Let us begin, Tessa said, nodding to the stenographer. Marcus Thorne, their lawyer, slid a document across the table. It was the post-nuptial amendment again. Brooke. This just formalizes the status quo, Graham said, his voice pleading. Sign it, and I give you the new codes to the house immediately. I unfreeze the cards. We can stop this. I picked up the pen, but I did not uncap it. I looked at the 3 of them, keeping my face blank. I am ready to sign. I lied smoothly, but for my own peace of mind. I need to understand one thing. I found a calendar invite labeled Leverage Window. I need to know. Whose idea was that the room went silent? I saw Graham's eyes dart toward Delaney. Vivian stiffened. It is just a term. Brooke, Graham muttered. It is a strategy. I corrected, using my labor as a pressure point. Was it yours, Graham, or was it yours? Vivian let out a sharp, impatient sigh. She looked at me with pure disdain. Oh, for heaven's sake, Brooke, if you had not been making such a scene, if you had just been cooperative instead of hysterical, none of this would have been necessary. We had to contain the situation. Let the record show. I said, keeping my eyes on the stenographer, that Mrs. Caldwell defines active labor as making a scene that required containment. Delaney leaned forward, her smile thin and predatory. It was not personal. Brooke? Delaney said, her voice smooth corporate alto. It was risk management. We had significant assets exposed during a volatile transition period. It is standard contingency planning. Surely, as a compliance officer, you understand protecting the firm. So you admit the lockout was a premeditated business decision? I asked, locking eyes with her. It was a necessary protective measure. Delaney replied, shrugging. And the bank accounts I turned to Graham. Why did you cut off my access to our joint funds while I was in the ambulance? Why change the recovery email? Graham slammed his hand on the table. The veneer of the grieving husband cracked instantly. Because you would have drained them, he shouted. I changed the email to the firm's address for convenience because you were not in a state to handle money. I had to take control. I looked at the court reporter. Her fingers were flying across the stenotype machine. He had just admitted to unauthorized modification of banking credentials to prevent a joint owner from accessing funds. He had admitted to financial abuse on the record. I capped the pen and set it down on the table with a deliberate click. Thank you, I said. That is all I needed. Sign the paper. Brooke, Vivian commanded, her voice losing its velvet edge. I stood up. I picked up my purse. I am not signing anything, I said calmly, and neither are you, ever again, on my behalf. You are bluffing, Graham sneered. You have nothing. You are homeless and broke. I looked at him, then at Delaney, and finally at Vivian. You people just turned family into a case file. I said. I turned and walked out of the room. Behind me, I heard Graham shouting, but it didn't matter. I had the transcript. They thought they were negotiating a surrender. They didn't realize they had just given a confession. The glow of my laptop screen was the only light in the corporate apartment as the third email from Sparrowline landed in my inbox. It was a single file titled Board Shield Draft. I opened it, and the air left my lungs. It was not just a document, it was a script. It outlined a step-by-step narrative to blame the financial oversight volunteer for any allocation irregularities found in the Heritage Fund. They had written a play where I was the villain, and they were the unsuspecting victims of my incompetence. I called Miles immediately. Run the metadata on the file I just forwarded, I said, my voice hard. On it, Miles replied. The sound of his mechanical keyboard clicked in the background. Okay, here we go. Created 3 months ago. Author D. Cross. Last modified yesterday at 4 in the afternoon. User G. Caldwell. I closed my eyes. For the last week, I had told myself Graham was weak. I had told myself he was a spineless man controlled by his mother. I was wrong. Graham was not a puppet. He was a partner. Delaney Cross had designed the cage, but Graham was the one who had locked me inside it. He had spent his afternoon editing a document that would send the mother of his child to prison for fraud. Brooke Miles asked, "Are you there? I am here." I said, "I am just realizing that I am not fighting a divorce. I am fighting a syndicate." I did not sleep. Instead, I logged into the independent whistleblower portal for the Heritage Fund. I did not hack anything. I did not use stolen passwords. I simply uploaded the public tax filings, the metadata from the PR photos, and the timestamps of the digital signatures. I wrote a cover letter that was devoid of emotion. I requested a forensic audit based on probable cause of identity theft and embezzlement. I hit submit at 6 o'clock in the morning. I expected a response in a week. I got one that evening. I was walking back to my rental car in the hospital parking garage after taking my daughter for her first pediatrician checkup. My phone buzzed. It was an automated notification from the fund's board receipt acknowledged, matter referred to external legal counsel for immediate review. My heart hammered. External counsel meant the board was scared. It meant Vivian could not talk her way out of this over tea and scones. The firewall had been breached. I unlocked my car door, checking the back seat to make sure the base was secure. When I turned around, Vivian was standing 3 feet away. She was wearing a trench coat, her hands deep in her pockets. She did not look like the Queen of Harbor Glen anymore. She looked like a cornered animal. I instinctively stepped between her and the rear door where my daughter slept. "You are making a mistake, Brooke," she said. Her voice was a low hiss, echoing off the concrete walls. I slid my hand into my pocket and double-tapped the shortcut on my phone. The recording app launched, logging the time and GPS location. "Stay away from me." "Vivian," I said clearly. She took a step closer. "You think you are clever with your little reports, but you do not understand how this town works. We survive. You are just a tourist here." She leaned in, her perfume cloying and sweet. "If you want to raise that child in peace, you need to disappear. Go back to wherever you came from. If you stay, there will be nothing left of you to bury." "Are you threatening me?" I asked, ensuring my voice was loud enough for the microphone. "I am giving you financial advice," she sneered. "Walk away while you still have legs." She turned and walked toward a black sedan waiting at the ramp. I waited until she was gone. Then I walked straight to the hospital security booth. "I need to file an incident report regarding a threat made on hospital property." I told the guard. "I have audio evidence." I was done being the victim. I was building a case file. When I got back to the apartment, Miles was waiting on the encrypted line. "They are hunting Brooke," he said. "I just flagged a login attempt on your old cloud storage account. The IP traces back to a server farm used by Hawthorne and Vance. They are scraping for anything old photos, texts, emails, anything they can twist to make you look unstable." "Let them look," I said, placing the baby in her bassinet. "They are looking for dirt. I am looking for the vault." I called Rhea and Tessa into a conference call. "We are bypassing civil court," I told them. "I am not asking for a settlement. I want to prepare a package for the financial regulatory authorities. We are sending the signature logs, the fund transfers, and the metadata on the board shield document. That is the nuclear option." "Brooke," Rhea warned, "once you send that to the feds, there is no going back. Graham will face criminal charges." I looked at the board shield draft on my screen, the document where my husband had edited the plan to frame me. He made his choice when he locked the door. I said, "Prepare the package." Graham slid the heavy binder across the mahogany table. It stopped inches from my hands. "It is a full settlement." "Brooke," Graham said, his voice tight and strained. "We are offering you the house, $2 million in a lump sum, and primary physical custody. You just need to sign the non-disclosure agreement and formally withdraw your request for the audit. You withdraw the whistleblower complaint today." I opened the binder. The NDA was 40 pages long, dense with legal jargon designed to bury the truth so deep that archaeologists would never find it. I looked up at the three of them. Graham looked desperate, sweat beading on his forehead. Vivian looked exhausted, her posture rigid. Delaney Cross looked bored, checking her watch as if she had a lunch reservation she was anxious to keep. "This is generous," I said, keeping my voice deliberately neutral. "But before I sign away my right to speak, I need an addendum. Clause 4 mentions resolving all past procedural disputes. That is too vague. I want a specific paragraph detailing the lockout event on the day of my labor. If I am going to keep a secret, I need to know exactly what I am being paid to hide." Vivian bristled, her eyes narrowing. "We are not writing that down. It was a miscommunication regarding the security system. We do not need to dwell on it." "It did not feel like a miscommunication," I said, leaning back in my chair. "It felt like a tactical error." Delaney's eyes snapped up from her watch. Her ego could not handle the implication of incompetence. "It was not an error," Delaney said sharply, her tone dripping with condescension. "That was a contingency plan because you refused to sign the amendment. We had to secure the asset execution window." The room went dead silent. Graham's face drained of all color. He stared at Delaney with wide, horrified eyes. He had expected her to use corporate buzzwords, not to explicitly admit that the lockout was a coercive tool used to force a signature. Delaney Vivian hissed, reaching out to grab her arm. But it was too late. The stenographer's keys clacked loudly in the quiet room, capturing every syllable of the admission. I smiled. It was the first time I had smiled in weeks. I reached for the thick NDA binder. I lifted the cover page and tore it slowly down the middle. The sound of ripping paper was violent in the stillness. "Here is the thing about this agreement," I said, tossing the torn pieces onto the polished table. "An NDA cannot cover up criminal activity that has already been reported to the authorities. The report you want me to withdraw, I submitted it yesterday afternoon." Delaney stood up so fast her chair tipped backward with a crash. For the first time, the cool executive mask shattered, revealing pure panic. "You have no right," she stammered, her voice rising an octave. "You are just the wife. You are a domestic accessory. I am the person whose name is on the digital signature you forged," I replied coldly. "And I am the person who can prove it." I turned my gaze to Graham, who looked like he was about to vomit. I decided to drop the final match into the gasoline. "Tell me, Graham," I said softly. "Who transferred the admin rights for our doorbell camera to Delaney? Did you give your business partner the ability to watch your wife and child sleep, or did she take it?" Graham blinked, confused. He looked at Vivian. Vivian looked at Delaney with sudden, sharp suspicion. I thought Mom handled the security," Graham stammered. "I never touched the digital permissions," Vivian said, her voice icy. She turned her gaze to Delaney, her eyes hardening. The alliance was breaking. The cracks were turning into chasms. "And those consulting fees?" Delaney Graham asked, his voice trembling as the realization hit him. "The ones to the Delaware Shell Company. You said those were standard retainers. You said legal approved them." Delaney smoothed her skirt, her face shutting down into a stone mask. She looked at Graham with absolute indifference. "Your signature is on the checks." "Graham," she said, "you signed them. You own them." Graham made a sound like a wounded animal. He realized in that second that he was not the partner. He was the scapegoat. I picked up my purse. "I think I will let you all discuss who is going to prison." I walked toward the door. As I reached the handle, Tessa's phone rang. She answered it, listened for 3 seconds, and then looked at me with a nod. "That was our contact," Tessa announced to the room, her voice projecting clearly. "Federal agents just executed a search warrant at the Heritage Fund offices. They have a seizure order for all electronic devices belonging to Graham Caldwell and Delaney Cross." I opened the door and walked out, leaving the sound of their destruction behind me. The emergency hearing regarding the assets and exclusive possession of the marital residence took place 48 hours later. Graham's legal team tried to paint a portrait of a woman unraveled. They claimed I was suffering from severe postpartum instability and that my financial decisions were erratic and dangerous. They asked the court to grant Graham temporary conservatorship over my accounts for my own protection. I sat silently next to Rhea. I did not outburst. I did not cry. When it was our turn, Rhea did not make a speech. She simply connected her tablet to the courtroom display and pressed play. The video from the doorbell camera played in high definition. The image of me, doubled over in labor pains on the porch, filled the screens. Then, Vivian's voice cut through the silence of the courtroom, clear and cruel. "After you sign, you can come back inside." The judge, a stern woman named Justice Holloway, leaned forward. She watched Graham sitting in his car in the garage, ignoring his wife screaming for help. She watched the red light of the lock blinking denial. "This is not instability, Your Honor," Rhea stated firmly. "This is extortion." Rhea then presented the bank logs. She showed that the call to change my recovery email originated from the office of Graham's own lawyer. Justice Holloway looked at the defense table with a gaze that could peel paint. She immediately issued an order to restore my full access and placed a strict restraining order on any changes to the accounts. Then Tessa stepped up. She displayed the header of the anonymous email sent to my employer. The IP address proves the campaign to destroy Ms. Halstead's career originated from the guest network at Hawthorne and Vance. Tessa explained. It was a coordinated attack to isolate the victim, but the final blow came from the independent auditor's preliminary report, which had just been unsealed. It revealed that the $250,000 in consulting fees had flowed directly to a shell company registered to Delaney Cross. The metadata on the approval documents showed they were created on Delaney's laptop, using a copy-pasted image of my signature. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Federal agents had raided the offices of Hawthorne and Vance that morning. We received word that Delaney Cross had her phone seized in the lobby of her building. Vivian, upon seeing the agents arrive at the fund's headquarters, had collapsed in a dramatic faint. However, the prosecutor played the security footage for the judge. It showed Vivian looking left and right to ensure no one was watching before she carefully lowered herself to the floor and closed her eyes. Justice Halloway turned her attention to Graham. "Mr. Caldwell," she asked, her voice low and dangerous. "Why did you lock your wife out of her home while she was in active labor?" Graham looked at his mother, then at Delaney's empty chair, and finally stammered. "My mother. She said it was the only way to handle the situation. She told me to wait." Justice Halloway took off her glasses. "Mr. Caldwell, are you a husband, or are you an employee of your mother?" The gavel came down like a thunderclap. The court granted me exclusive use of the marital residence and full medical decision-making power for our daughter. Graham was granted only supervised visitation, pending the outcome of the fraud investigation. 3 hours later, I stood on the welcome mat where my water had broken. This time, I was not alone, and I was not begging. A locksmith stood next to me. "Drill it," I said. He drilled out the core of the smart lock. I installed a new system, one that was hardwired and encrypted with a code only I knew. I pulled out my phone and revoked all admin privileges for the cameras, kicking Delaney and Graham off the network permanently. Then, I opened the banking app. With the court order in hand, I initiated a total freeze on the joint assets, cutting off Graham's access to the funds he had tried to steal. I walked into the kitchen. The house was quiet. I took a copy of the court order and the time-stamped log of the lockout and placed them in the center of the kitchen island. I looked up at the interior security camera, the one I knew Graham used to check on the house. I knew he was probably watching the black feed on his phone right now, realizing he had lost control. I looked directly into the lens. I did not smile. I did not wave. I just stared until I was sure he felt the weight of my silence. Then, I picked up my daughter's carrier and walked out the back door into the garden. The door clicked shut behind me, locking automatically. This time, the lock was protecting me, not trapping me. I was free. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and let's chat. If you enjoyed this revenge drama, please subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more people.